The encrypted phone call came at 3:47 a.m. London time. Keir Starmer fumbled for his secure device in the darkness of his Downing Street bedroom, already knowing this wouldn't be good news. What he heard in the next 90 seconds would trigger the most devastating political crisis of his career and force King Charles III to break 7 decades of constitutional precedent. On the other end was Sir Jeremy Fleming, former head of GCHQ, his voice tense with urgency. "Prime Minister, we have a situation. Trump knows about the hotel program. Everything. The costs, the locations, the services. It's all coming out in 6 hours." The line went dead. Starmer sat in the pre-dawn darkness, his political instincts already calculating the magnitude of the disaster heading his way. But the real earthquake hadn't even started yet. What Trump was about to reveal would expose not just a financial scandal, but a moral crisis so profound that even Britain's constitutional monarch would be forced to choose sides. The leak had originated from David Morrison, a junior civil servant in the Home Office's accommodation unit. Morrison, whose nephew was a Royal Marine veteran sleeping rough in Manchester, had been processing invoices for migrant hotels for 18 months, 4-star hotels with spa facilities, ocean view suites with room service, all funded by taxpayers while British veterans slept in doorways. The contrast haunted Morrison until he made a decision that would reshape British politics. The documents Morrison leaked to American intelligence contacts revealed the staggering scope of what Whitehall insiders called Operation Sanctuary. Over £1.2 billion spent in just 18 months housing asylum seekers and illegal migrants in premium accommodations across England. The Crown Plaza in Birmingham, the Hilton Garden Inn in Liverpool, seaside resorts in Brighton with panoramic views and full leisure facilities. Each migrant family received not just accommodation, but comprehensive support packages, including daily cleaning services, prepared meals, recreational activities, and even spa access. The per-person daily cost averaged £187, more than most working British families spent on their entire weekly food budget. Meanwhile, the government's own statistics showed over 13,000 military veterans experiencing homelessness across the UK. But Morrison's leak contained something even more explosive, a secret Home Office memo from Starmer's Deputy Chief of Staff, admitting that the luxury hotel policy was designed specifically to prevent negative media coverage. 4-star accommodation reduces the likelihood of sympathetic migrant stories reaching hostile press outlets, the memo read. Better to overspend on comfort than underspend and face humanitarian criticism. The cynicism was breathtaking. Starmer's government wasn't providing luxury accommodation out of compassion. They were doing it to manipulate public perception while simultaneously abandoning British veterans to save money. The political calculation was cold and brutal. Migrants generated media sympathy when mistreated, but homeless veterans rarely made front-page news. At 9:15 a.m. Eastern Time, Trump stepped before cameras at Mar-a-Lago with leaked documents and righteous fury. The British government spends more per day on illegal migrants than most American families earn in a week, while heroes who fought beside our soldiers sleep in cardboard boxes on London streets. From his jacket, Trump produced the photograph that would define the scandal: James Patterson, a 34-year-old Royal Marine veteran with 3 Afghanistan tours, sleeping in a McDonald's doorway. His military medals visible on his jacket, a cardboard sign, "Veteran, please help." The photo was taken 200 meters from Crown Plaza Hotel, where 17 migrant families enjoyed taxpayer-funded luxury suites. The moral contrast was devastating. Spa services for illegal migrants, while decorated war heroes begged for food. Within minutes of Trump's press conference ending, British social media exploded. Veterans before migrants began trending within the hour, reaching 2.3 million posts and 45 million engagements within 48 hours. The hashtag wasn't driven by political activists or organized campaigns. It spread organically through ordinary British families, military communities, and working-class voters who felt betrayed by their own government's priorities. The visual content was particularly devastating. TikTok videos contrasting migrant hotel buffets with veterans sleeping rough, Instagram stories showing spa facility invoices alongside photographs of homeless heroes, Twitter threads documenting the daily cost of migrant luxury accommodation compared to veteran support programs. The algorithms amplified this content because the engagement rates were extraordinary. Moral outrage generates clicks, and this scandal had moral clarity that transcended political tribalism. But the real political earthquake began at 4:30 p.m. that same day when an unmarked car arrived at the back entrance of Buckingham Palace. King Charles III had requested an emergency meeting with his private secretary, Sir Clive Alderton, and the keeper of the Privy Purse. What transpired in that 90-minute meeting would shatter constitutional precedent and leave Starmer's government fighting for survival. Palace sources later revealed that the king had been quietly funding emergency accommodation for homeless veterans through his personal charitable foundation for over 6 months. Charles had been using his own money to provide what his government wouldn't: basic shelter and dignity for British heroes. The irony was devastating. The constitutional monarch was personally housing veterans, while the elected Prime Minister provided luxury for migrants. The King's intervention came during a veterans' charity gala at the Guildhall 3 days later, in what royal historians now call the most politically charged speech of his reign. Charles delivered a message that left Westminster absolutely stunned. Speaking to an audience of military families and veteran support organisations, the King declared with unmistakable emphasis, "Those who have served this nation with honour and courage deserve our care before all others, before all others." The phrase "before all others" wasn't diplomatic language, it was a constitutional monarch taking sides in a political debate. Royal speeches are reviewed by government officials. Every word is carefully calibrated. For the king to explicitly prioritise veterans over all others in the context of the migrant hotel scandal was unprecedented. Buckingham Palace was effectively declaring that the Crown supported Trump's criticism over Starmer's policies. The reaction in Westminster was immediate and explosive. Conservative MPs erupted in cheers during Prime Minister's questions when Sir Graham Brady read the King's words aloud. Labour backbenchers sat in stunned silence as their own constitutional monarch appeared to side with a foreign president against their Prime Minister. Speaker Lindsay Hoyle struggled to maintain order as the chamber descended into chaos. Starmer's response was a disaster that compounded his political crisis. Visibly shaken and constantly referring to pre-written notes, he attempted to defend the hotel program as necessary humanitarian provision, while insisting that veteran support remained a government priority. His words rang hollow when contrasted with the King's moral clarity and Trump's documented evidence of taxpayer waste. The economic consequences were swift and devastating. American tech companies, already frustrated with Labour's censorship policies, began emergency relocations to Dublin, Amsterdam, and Frankfurt. Google announced its European content moderation headquarters would move from London to Ireland. Microsoft transferred key operations to Germany. British tech stocks crashed as international investors lost confidence in Starmer's judgment. Treasury officials privately admitted the standoff with America could cost Britain hundreds of billions in lost trade and investment. The post-Brexit economic recovery that Starmer had promised was crumbling before his eyes. International partners from Australia to Canada expressed concerns about Britain's drift toward authoritarianism under Labour leadership. But the deeper crisis was moral legitimacy. When a foreign president and your own monarch both publicly question your judgment, when war veterans sleep rough while illegal migrants enjoy spa services, you're not facing ordinary political opposition. You're confronting a complete collapse of moral authority that no amount of spin can remedy. The street protests began in Manchester and spread across Britain like wildfire. These weren't fringe demonstrations organised by political extremists. They were organic expressions of working-class rage from military families, veterans groups, and ordinary citizens who felt betrayed by their government's priorities. Police closed Westminster Bridge as crowds swelled larger each day, their chant echoing through Parliament Square, "Homes for heroes, not hotels for migrants." The most powerful images came from the protests themselves. British veterans in wheelchairs, some missing limbs from IED explosions in Afghanistan, holding signs asking why illegal migrants received luxury treatment while they slept on streets. The visual contrast between sacrifice and abandonment was so morally compelling that even left-wing media outlets struggled to dismiss the demonstrations as extremism. Inside Downing Street, sources described an atmosphere of complete panic. Cabinet meetings devolved into shouting matches as ministers openly questioned Starmer's political survival. 3 junior ministers privately warned the Prime Minister that his policies had become politically toxic. Over 40 Labour backbenchers signed letters demanding urgent review of migrant spending, terrified of losing their seats to Reform UK candidates exploiting the scandal. Nigel Farage and Reform UK capitalised on the chaos with devastating effectiveness. Their Veterans First campaign surged 8 points in the polls within 1 week as working-class voters abandoned Labour in droves. The party that had once represented British workers was losing them to populists who promised to prioritise heroes over migrants. The breaking point arrived during a particularly brutal Prime Minister's question session when Conservative MP Sarah Henderson stood with a photograph of James Patterson and demanded answers. Can the Prime Minister explain why silencing American tech companies is more important than giving this British war hero a warm bed? Her voice carried the moral authority of someone speaking for 13,000 homeless veterans across Britain. Starmer's fumbling response revealed a man who had completely lost control of his narrative. He spoke about complex humanitarian obligations and balanced approaches to accommodation policy, while the photograph of Patterson sleeping rough remained visible on the Chamber's television screens. No amount of bureaucratic language could overcome the moral clarity of that image. The international humiliation was equally devastating. Headlines from Washington to Canberra were savage. Britain betrays its heroes. Free speech under siege in London. The moral collapse of Starmer's Britain. America's closest ally was being portrayed as a nation that had lost its moral compass under Labour leadership. The scandal's political implications extended far beyond Starmer's personal survival. Britain was experiencing a constitutional crisis where the monarch, foreign allies, and popular opinion aligned against an elected government. The traditional deference to Westminster authority was collapsing as citizens witnessed their leaders prioritising foreign migrants over British heroes. Social media groups like Veterans Before Migrants gained over 500,000 members in 2 weeks, organising boycotts, fundraising for homeless veterans, and creating viral content that reached millions daily. The movement transcended traditional political boundaries as Labour voters joined Conservatives in demanding moral leadership from their government. Political analysts agreed that Starmer's leadership was effectively finished. The only question was whether his government could survive another month without completely disintegrating. Britain was watching a Prime Minister self-destruct in real time, his moral authority destroyed by his own policy choices and the intervention of a foreign president and constitutional monarch. The crisis would be studied for decades as a textbook example of how moral leadership failures can trigger constitutional emergencies. At its epicenter stood a man who looked increasingly isolated, desperate, and finished. Trump's warning about moral clarity had exposed a British government that had forgotten its most fundamental obligation, caring for those who served their country with honor. This wasn't just political defeat, it was historical humiliation that would define Starmer's legacy forever. When your own king sides with a foreign president against you, when veterans sleep rough while migrants enjoy luxury, when the streets fill with protesters demanding basic moral decency, you haven't just lost an election, you've lost the right to govern.